In January of 2025, Brian Orhurst is a commercial beekeeper in Southern California. He runs 25,000 hives. One morning, he opens his bee boxes and finds more than half of them are dead. His phone starts ringing. Every almond grower in the Central Valley is asking the same question. Have you got any extra bees? Nobody did. America had just lost 1.7 million bee colonies in 8 months, and it was about to cost the global food system $600 million, all before breakfast. The global honey industry is worth about $10 billion a year. And honey should be the simplest product on earth. Bees make it, you put it on your toast. But almost everything you think you know about honey is wrong. 3 questions we want to answer today. Why is most of the honey in your cupboard not actually honey? Why do the people who keep bees make most of their money not selling honey? And why did 2025 nearly break a system that quietly underwrites 1 in 3 bites of food you eat? Let's start with the numbers. About 1.8 million metric tons of honey gets produced every year worldwide. Unsurprisingly, we find China back in the top producers with roughly a quarter of that production, around 470,000 tons, making it the largest producer by a very wide margin. Turkey, Iran, Argentina, Ukraine, and then India follow. The United States is the biggest importer, over 220,000 tons a year. That's because Americans eat far more honey than they produce, and the gap is filled by global trade. So you'd expect a fairly normal commodity market, producer countries, consumer countries, jars on shelves. But here's where it gets strange. When researchers from the Macquarie University tested 95 commercial honeys using the only internationally accepted purity test, they found that 52% of Asian samples were adulterated, meaning not real honey or altered in some form. 28% of European market samples were also adulterated, and every single Manuka honey they tested came back fake. A separate EU investigation in 2023 found that 46% of all honey on the UK supermarket shelves had been tampered with. Usually cut with rice syrup or sugarcane syrup that's almost impossible to detect. Honey is now the 3rd most adulterated food in the world. Only milk and olive oil sit above it. So your jar of supermarket honey, that's roughly a coin flip chance that it's probably not honey. So the real money in beekeeping isn't in honey anymore. Every February in California, roughly 1.4 million acres of almond trees flower. Now, these almonds produce 80% of the world's supply. California grows essentially all of them, and almonds don't self-pollinate. They need bees, and a lot of them. So every winter, commercial beekeepers from Montana, Florida, and Texas load their hives onto flatbed trucks and drive them, sometimes more than 1,000 miles, to the Central Valley. It's the single largest pollination event on Earth. Roughly 2.8 million colonies show up. That's nearly every managed bee colony in the United States, all in the same place for a period of 3 weeks. And the growers pay for it. In 2024, the average almond pollination fee was $181 per colony. In 2025, that jumped to $209. Compare that to roughly $66 for any other crop. The USDA now estimates the total US pollination service market at over $400 million, and more than any other honey product on the shelf, that pollination clears it by a mile. Beekeepers make more money renting their bees than they do selling their honey. So Brian Orhurst, the beekeeper in California who lost more than half his bees in early 2025, he wasn't losing a honey crop, he was losing his almond contracts. A couple of ideas explain why honey markets look the way that they do. First, a concept called derived demand. Coined by Alfred Marshall in 1890, the price of a thing is often set not by people who want the thing itself, but by people who want what it enables. Almond growers don't want bees, they want almonds. But you can't have one without the other. So, the price of almonds drives the price of renting bees, which drives the price of replacing dead bees, which drives the survival of the entire commercial beekeeping industry. Second is adverse selection, a concept developed by George Akraloff in his 1970s paper, The Market for Lemons. When buyers can't tell good quality from bad, fakes drive out the real product. Pure honey from a small producer costs maybe $25 a kilo. Imported sugar syrup cut honey can land in the same supermarket aisle at as little as $5 to $8. The consumer can't really tell the difference, so the real stuff gets pushed out or has to switch into specialty channels, Manuka, raw, organic, single origin, to escape the price floor that the fakes set. This is very similar to what we covered in the salt episode. When a commodity becomes hard to verify, the market splits off. And third, a classic on the channel is externalities, when private decisions create costs or benefits that don't show up in the price. Pesticide use on the corn farm in Iowa kills bees foraging miles away. The corn grower doesn't pay for that, the beekeeper does, and eventually, so does every almond grower in California. When you stack these three together, derived demand, fakes, and externalities, you get the modern honey market. A system where the product itself is barely the point, the price signals are completely corrupted, and the cost of failure is paid by people who don't show up in any contract. A story common with bees that everyone tells is the colony collapse disorder. It hit headlines all the way back in 2006, entire hives going silent, mysterious, existential to an extent. What happened in 2005 was worse, and it was nothing like that. Between June 2024 and March 2025, US commercial beekeepers lost 62% of their colonies. That's 1.7 million hives. The highest annual loss rate ever recorded since national surveying began. Because it wasn't mysterious, it was a parasite called the varroa, and it had developed resistance to the chemicals beekeepers are using to control it for over 20 years. Once the mite broke through, the viruses they carry spread through the colonies and the bees couldn't fight them off. The 2025 collapse wasn't a colony collapse disorder event. It was a slow industrial failure that finally compounded. And the people who get hardest were the commercial operators, the ones running tens of thousands of hives or more. The ones almond growers in California depend on entirely, and the ones that will eventually deliver the honey to your supermarket shelves. So where does this go? The trend line is clear. Bee losses have been creeping up for 15 years. Commercial beekeeping is consolidating. Smaller operations are folding because they can't absorb 60% annual losses. The cost of pollination is going up. The price of almonds, blueberries, apples, and cherries reflect that. The wild card is regulation. Again, the EU is moving on honey adulteration disclosure rules. Australia is pushing for mandatory origin labels. If the US follows and the political pressure is building after the 2025 crisis, the supermarket honey aisle could change overnight. So who are the winners in all of this? Right now, it's large commercial beekeepers with capital. These include Adee Honey Farms, Glory Bee, They have operations running 50,000 plus hives. They survive because they can afford indoor overwintering sheds, weekly mite monitoring, and the cash reserves to replace 60% of their colonies in a single bad year. So who loses? Definitely the hobbyist beekeeper. A 60% loss rate on 20 hives means starting from scratch, and most don't. Imported conventional honey. Now that is going to be challenged by all those laws coming in that is going to make ingredients be very clearly shown on the label. And last but certainly not least, the Californian almond grower. They built a $12 billion industry on the assumption that pollination would always be available at a known price. And as 2025 has shown us, that is no longer the case. Now, old mate Brian Ornhurst is still operating. A lot of beekeepers in his position, they're not. Every almond, blueberry, apple, cherry, and avocado you eat this year was made possible by a system that lost more than half of its working units in 8 months. And that almost nobody outside of the industry noticed. The next time you put honey on your toast or your cereal, check the label. There's a real coin flip chance you're eating syrup. And whatever's in the jar, there is almost certainly a chance the bees that made it are part of the system holding on by a thread. So leave me a comment down below. Do you know where your honey comes from? Are you surprised that the majority of beekeepers make their money not from honey, but by renting out their bees? That really caught me off guard. And next week, stay tuned because we are going to tackle lawns, specifically why the American suburban lawn uses more water than all the country's crops combined, and how a single weekend chore became a $100 billion industry. My name's Shannon. This is the default option. Thank you so much for watching. See you in the next one.